Hello. We've been talking about signs and seasons because the heavenly bodies, as we've said, have been given to the world, or set up in the cosmos as markers for change and markers for religious festivals. So people can measure time and do things according to a temporal pattern. And previously we talked about religious festivals in the world, and we focused on the most populous religions and how they structure time according to the movements of especially the sun and the moon. We might also mention that pagan peoples have always marked not only the four cardinal points of the year, the two solstices and the two equinoxes, but the halfway points between the solstices and the equinoxes. They are the so-called cross-quarter days. So with the original four cardinal points and the four cross-quarter days, you get that eightfold division, which is the temporal basis for the feasts of the pagans and the Wiccans, feasts like Beltane and Lughnasadh and Samhain. All of this has to do with divisions of time. There are also considerations to do with divisions of space. And I would like to turn towards sort of large scale macro structures in the solar system and on Earth. In order to complete this series for this year, at least, on signs and seasons, we're moving more into the spatial realm, but as we've seen, it is very difficult to disentangle the components of the quadrivium because they are designed to go together and reinforce each other. Remember, the components in the quadrivium are arithmetic, geometry, harmony, and astronomy. So just going into one tends to open the field to others. When we were talking about the Great Pyramid of Egypt, we mentioned how it encoded the number pi and the golden ratio phi into its geometry. Well, that geometry is also projected around the globe because we can see that looking at different sacred sites on the planet that belong in different cultures and different religious milieu, there is a good argument that can be made that they are geometrically situated. Remember that the golden ratio phi is a section. So if you had, let's say, a line, there is a way of dividing that line such that the ratio between the smaller segment and the larger segment is the same as the ratio between the larger segment and the whole line. So this golden ratio turns out to be 0.618, etc. It's a transcendental number. Now, if you look at the distance around a great circle from Angkor Wat, which is a big temple complex in Cambodia, associated with the Khmer people and Hinduism. If you look at the distance from there to Giza, around a great circle that can be continued beyond Giza and come back to Nazca in Peru, where they have those amazing lines and figures on the plain, of which we have aerial images, like the big hummingbird and so on. This part of Peru seems to be really interesting from a religious perspective, but also geometrically, because the ratio on that circle from Angkor to Giza compared to the distance from Giza back around to Nazca is in the golden proportion. What I'm suggesting here is that a good case can be made, or at least a hypothesis advanced, that the same kind of obsession with geometry that we find built into the Great Pyramid of Giza is kind of scaled up to the whole globe and is present in the relative situation of sacred sites on the planet as well. Before we get into more detail on that, maybe we should pull out a bit and consider the possibility that there is a geometric design to the cosmos. Of course, Pythagoras believed that the whole universe was constructed on numbers and that there was a music to the spheres. So did Plato. And there is a geometry that seems to be apparent in our solar system. And I'm not talking about the distances between the different bodies, although one can find geometric patterns, arithmetic patterns in that. I'm talking about the application of Platonic solids to bodies in the solar system, giving us key points on the surface of a sphere, because we're essentially dealing with spheres when we talk about planets. Now, Plato said that there were 5 solids that could be fit touching the boundaries of a sphere. So you could fit these, you could, if you had them of the right size, then they could snugly and perfectly fit within a sphere, just touching at different points without poking through, as it were. One is the cube. If you get a cube of the right size, you can sit it within a sphere. Another is the icosahedron. It's a 20-sided regular polyhedron, each side of which is each face is a triangle. Equilateral, I think. Yes. Now, there is also the tetrahedron, which we've mentioned before, which is a 4-sided solid with triangular sides, different from a pyramid in that a pyramid has a square base. The tetrahedron has 4 triangular faces. Then there's the octahedron that Plato mentioned, which is like two tetrahedra stacked one upon the other. And the 5th Platonic solid is the dodecahedron, which is a 12-sided regular polyhedron that can fit inside a sphere, each face of which is a regular pentagon, a five-sided figure. So it forms a bit of a soccer ball pattern. Yeah. And I think in one of the Platonic dialogues, he says that the earth looked down from above looks like one of those leather balls, like a soccer ball that the kids kick around. So there's this notion that goes back to antiquity that nested within the sphere, indeed within a planetary globe, is a series of geometric figures. Now, that doesn't mean that they're geometric solids in the same dimension, but some people have hypothesized that they can be signs of portals or vortices of energy and connection points between this dimension and another dimension, or this level of vibratory reality and the next level on the spectrum. If you put a tetrahedron inside a sphere and you position the apex at the north or the south pole of the sphere, in fact, if you have two of these tetrahedra interlaced, you get a star tetrahedron. It's not an octagon where one sits perfectly on top of the other, but if you interlace them such that they're like a three-dimensional Star of David, this figure has a lot of currency in sacred geometric circles because it's meant to represent the Merkaba, or vehicle of manifestation, a vehicle that allows for a movement between one dimension and another. So it's essentially the two tetrahedra. Let's say you put one vertex at the South Pole, one vertex at the North Pole. Now the sides of the tetrahedra are going to touch the sphere at a latitude of 19.5 degrees north and south. Now this number, which is geometrically derived, 19.5 degrees, may well be significant in revealing to us how geometry can play into the construction of the solar system. For example, in the sun at 19.5 degrees north and south of the solar equator, you find the main areas of sunspot activity. And the sunspot activity gives us the solar flares, which bathe the Earth in radiation. On the planet Venus, there seem to be volcanic structures. I think they're called Regio A and B. At these latitudes. On our own planet Earth, at 19.5 degrees north of the equator, we have our biggest volcanoes in Hawaii, Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea. If we go to the planet Mars and we look at what's happening around 19.5 degrees, give or take a degree. We've got the largest shield volcano in the whole solar system, Mons Olympus. Also the Cydonia structure with that so-called face on Mars, which may be an example of pareidolia, which we've talked about, where we actually see things in structures. Just as we see patterns in the stars and identify constellation groupings. That is also around the 19.5 degree mark. If we go to Jupiter, the great red spot is at that level, which seems to be a place of turbulence and storms on the planet. So we've got volcanic activity, storms, energy points, vortices of energy. And we can see this also at Neptune, where there is a spot. The Voyager 2 probe revealed that the spot on Neptune, which is at a similar latitude. There's no particular reason why they should all be at the same latitude. It could be coincidence, but it's worth looking at the possibility, as some researchers do, that this is a product of sacred geometry and of nesting the tetrahedron or the star tetrahedron inside a sphere and finding points of connection between this dimension and a more subtle realm. Because every entity has an outward aspect, but it also has an interiority as well. We are the same. We have a physical body, you and I, but we also have emotion and feeling and thought and a spiritual life. And that's going on the inside. And another hypothesis which researchers are investigating is that even with the human organism, there are vortices, connection points between our exterior, the physical body that we can see from the outside, and our interior life. We've heard of the chakras that are mentioned in the Eastern systems, which would seem to be externalizing in the endocrine glands of the body, like the thyroid and the thymus and the adrenals and so on, around which there are nerve plexuses, but the chakras are posited as vortices of energy that meet up with the outer sphere. In this case, my sphere is this body that you can see. Right? Meet up with the outer sphere, but also provide connection points to the human psyche, to the human soul. And similarly, practitioners of Chinese medicine who use acupuncture believe that the body is wrapped around with meridians, subtle channels through which an energy called qi flows. So there may be hubs and vortices, but there are also channels of different calibers that form a kind of grappling hook system between the body and the soul. We're talking about something that's subtle, that's not empirically observable, but it is testable in other ways, and it is the subject of a discussion and experiment at the moment as we speak, and nothing definitive has landed in the culture about it. even though more and more allopathic Western medical practitioners are employing alternative or complementary therapies, which are predicated on the existence of this subtle energy and this subtle network of channels. As the human body is said to have meridians, the earth is said to have meridians, which are sometimes called ley lines and sometimes called dragon lines. And to get a fair perspective on all of this, you have to look at the evidence that suggests that important sites, not just towns and cities, but ancient sacred sites, being located at a confluence of these ley lines. You look at the anecdotal evidence of water dowsers as well. People looking for water under the surface with dowsing implements. And there seems to be a connection between what they're doing and the subtle currents that are flowing in the earth, the telluric currents. Animals seem to be sensitive to this as well. So it's not crackpot stuff, but quite plausible to suggest that there is a system of energy channels engirdling the earth, and that energy can flow, has directions of flow on the earth from place to place. It's also not far-fetched to imagine, again, hypothetically, that there might have been a time when human beings were more in touch with these energies, with how to connect with them, how to use them, and maybe even develop technologies which depend upon them. So we might have to broaden our understanding of technology as well, because today technology means jet travel and washing machines and digital technology, Apple iPhones and so on, all of which are in a form of applied science. But are there other knowledge systems, sciences if you like, that give us other technologies because they have their own applications? This is something worth looking into as well. Because, well, it's something worth looking into, full stop. There are things that we believe about the past which may be worth questioning. We don't think that human beings really understood the sphericity of the planet, that it was a globe of certain dimensions until a few centuries before Christ. Was it the Greek astronomer Eratosthenes? So we date that knowledge relatively recently compared to the whole history of our species and of the planet. But if the Great Pyramid of Giza, as I explained once, represents a scaled down version of the northern hemisphere of the Earth, then many millennia before Eratosthenes, human beings knew about the scale, the dimensions of the Earth. the Earth was a globe, it knew about its poles, and it must have had some conception of its girth, its longitude. We believe that longitude wasn't discovered until the 1750s by a clockmaker of the name Harrison. He won a prize in building some sort of chronometer for ships that could explain that could give accurate readings of what a ship's longitude were. Because if you get longitude wrong, you can crash on a reef or end up on the wrong coastline, and you don't know where you are in travelling the seas. You have the fixed stars, but you also need a sense of where you are around the globe. Now, we think that we hadn't cracked the longitude puzzle until the 1750s, as I say. But it may be that ancient peoples had a good grasp of longitude many millennia before that, judging by the placement of ancient sites, which I'll go into in the next video. Just looking at their relative location makes us wonder whether they knew about the girth and the depth and the size of the Earth. So, sacred geometry, possibility of an Earth grid of subtle channels, which we call the Earth grid or ley lines, dragon lines, and a knowledge of longitude may have been knowledge possessions of ancient peoples. Longitude, of course, longitude lines are a series of great circles wrapping around the Earth, going from pole to pole and back to the pole. So you can imagine you can have as many as you want, really, encircling the globe. And that's why any given place on the surface of the planet can be identified with the coordinates of latitude and longitude. Longitude will tell you where it is in relation to the poles. It'll tell you where it is in relation to a prime meridian. Today, because of, I suppose, England's preeminence when Harrison cracked the longitude code, we take the prime meridian as Greenwich in England. That becomes 0 degrees longitude. And then if you're on the east coast of Australia, for example, you're about 150 degrees east of the prime meridian. So if you go west, you head towards the Americas. If you go east in longitude, you head through Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific. And of course they meet up at the international date line. You go 100 degrees either way and you meet up there. Lines of latitude, of course, the equator is 0 degrees latitude, and then circles which have diminishing circumferences can be drawn down to the polar points. and they give you your horizontal coordinate, if you like, and the longitude will give you your vertical coordinate. So I want to come back in a minute and explain why I think that the builders of some ancient sites may have had a much better idea of how the Earth was structured, its size, its dimensions and so on, than we give them credit for.